Voters in our region are looking to cast their vote in the upcoming general election. Northwest Public Broadcasting and the League of Women Voters of Benton and Franklin counties want you to know the candidates. Recorded at the Washington State University Tri-Cities campus, this is Vote 2022.
Good evening and welcome to this virtual candidate forum. My name is Ravine Jimenez. I am a member of the League of Women Voters of Benton and Franklin counties. The League is a nonpartisan organization that neither supports nor opposes candidates. In presenting these forums, it is our goal to provide opportunities for voters to become better informed about the people who are running for public office. The 2022 general election candidate forums have been pre-recorded in person by Northwest Public Broadcasting at the WSU Tri-City studio rather than on Zoom. They will also now be available at nwpb.org/vote2022 through our additional partners, the Columbia Basin Badger Club, the cities of Richland and Pasco, and of course, the League's website and Facebook page. Please go to lwv/bf.org to see the complete information for accessing any and all of these sites through November 8th, 2022. At this time, I would like to introduce our moderator, Matt Lovelace from Murrow College of Communication, WSU Pullman. Please welcome Matt.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for the opportunity to do this with you again, back for a second night in our week of 2022 election coverage. We're here at the WSU Tri-Cities campus to take a look at a number of races on ballots in the Tri-Cities this election season. As always, the goal is pretty simple: to give you, the voter, a chance to learn where your candidates stand on some major issues affecting the area. And that area today is the 16th Legislative District. Now, before we meet candidates, here's how today's program will work. We have two races to cover today, both for House positions in the 16th District. And with that, here's how timing will work. All candidates are going to have 90-second opening statements. We'll then follow with 6 questions for each of these races and a 90-second time limit for responses on those. And we should have time for some closing statements as well, so we'll get to hear plenty from our candidates tonight. Now, as moderator, within the time parameters of this hour-long program, I do reserve the right to include more or fewer questions. Of course, we will also do our best to stay on time and on topic and keep everything fair here today. So with that, let's get right to it. In a race for Representative Position 1 in the 16th District, emerging from the primary, were incumbent Mark Clicker and ready to face challenger Jeff Strickler. Mr. Strickler, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate your time, and we're happy to have you in person. We've done some virtual forums in the past. We are here in a studio. Now, as I said in our rules overview, we'll begin with opening statements from each of you. Mr. Clicker, the time is yours, sir, for a 90-second opening statement.
Well, thank you, Matt, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting this together for us. Gives us an opportunity to give kind of insight of where we're at and what we're doing and why we want to run for office. My family came into the area in 1861. They pioneered and farmed in the Wawa Valley. As I grew up, my family did business throughout the Tri-City area, Prosser, Benton City, in Pasco, and so we're very part of the community throughout the 16th Legislative District. I have been part of it in my work with the Washington Farm Bureau as a regional director, and worked with many of the constituents throughout the whole district. It's very important to me that we consider and look at the issues at hand, and primarily those issues have to do with taxes and regulations. They have to do with crime and public safety. Those things have really gone awry, and we need to change that and bring it back to the local people, bring it back to make our communities safe again. And at the same time, we need to create an energy grid that is so detrimental to our society, especially in the 16th Legislative District. And so I'm looking at all kinds of ways of creating new energy that doesn't have a huge footprint, but puts people to work, and it's sufficient, and it creates more jobs and energy.
All right, thank you very much, sir. And moving on to you, Mr. Strickler, you have 90 seconds for an opening statement.
Thank you, Matt, and thanks to the League of Women Voters for having us here tonight. My name is Jeff Strickler, and I'm running to be your representative in Olympia here in the 16th. And I'm running in large part because of what you've told me you've told me while we're out on the campaign trail that you're concerned about good paying jobs, that this is affecting your ability to afford housing, to afford health care, to afford child care. We know that your household income directly relates to your ability to afford housing. And if you can't afford a house, how are you ever going to stay here and live here, put down roots here? It's not only about cost, though, it's also about access. Many of you have shared heartwarming stories, really powerful stories about how do I get my child, for example, access to the health care they need, the mental health care that they need. If you can't find child care, then how can you go get that high-paying job, right? These are the things that you've told me matter to you in your communities. I think we need to do more to support our businesses and to support economic growth here in our region. And I think we need to do it mindful of the unique environment and climate here in Eastern Washington. I'm very concerned about water rights within our area, especially as we see growth in housing. And I'm very concerned about, or I see opportunity in, what we can do in the area of renewable energy. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Strickler, thank you very much. Now let's get to the questions brought to us by the League of Women Voters of Benton and Franklin counties, and a topic that's been on minds for at least the past years, infrastructure. Do you believe that the 16th legislative district has any significant infrastructure needs? And if so, what are they? And how would you advocate for them? Mr. Clicker, 90 seconds to you, sir.
Yes, the 16th district needs all kinds of infrastructure, primarily in the transportation arena. We have Tank Farm Road and A Street that is very dangerous. When we have the Amazon distribution center where it's going to employ over 1,500 people, that's going to be a corridor that's just very unsafe, as it is already, and they're trying to make some changes. But we need to get some funding for that. At the same time, Road 100, where they're looking at putting in a new Costco, we need to make that change off of interchange I-182. And so we need to get some funding within that area as well. But probably one of the biggest issues is Highway 12, Phase 8. There was no money that was provided for that in the last session before. All we need to do is fix Phase 8, finish it up for a four-way freeway, which will create more safety for the travelers. It'll reduce time, and it'll connect the Tri-Cities and Walla Walla, where your economic recovery and production will really matter. And so there's a number of transportation issues. At the same time, they have a mental health center over in Kennewick that they're working on. We need more, as Mr. Strickler said, more mental health education and care for some of the people that are within mental health and drug issues.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Clicker. Mr. Strickler, same question to you. I can sort of restate it for you here. Any significant infrastructure needs, and how would you address them here in the 16th?
I don't think there's any question that we have significant infrastructure needs, and they can play, I mean, infrastructure comes in many forms, right? One that comes to mind, for example, is increased broadband access, which will help stimulate business growth, help with our early stage businesses and so forth. I'm very concerned about transportation in our area, and Mr. Clicker has already illuminated many of those kinds of projects. But I think this is a key point between the two of us. Mr. Clicker sat on the Transportation Committee this last year at a time of a budget surplus in our state and at a time where a major transportation initiative was passed in our state. And I think he's very concerned, as I am, why didn't we get dollars specifically for Highway 12, but for these other projects?
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Strickler. Appreciate that. Let's move on to question number 2, and this one's a fascinating topic. Certainly, some of your constituents in the 16th would be interested as well. Do you believe that Eastern Washington, and this is very philosophical, should break off from Washington State and become part of Idaho? I know this is a nuanced, complicated topic, so let's address it as an idea. And why would you not support an idea like that, Mr. Strickler? Let's start with you.
So let's just cut to the chase. We're Washington. Yes, there are differences between East and West. You know, go Cougs, right? There's many differences between the two sides of our state. But the more that we focus on these differences, again, whether they're political, whether they're geographic, the more we tear each other apart. And I think this is one of the major challenges that we've got here in Eastern Washington in how we go to Olympia, not to exacerbate those differences, but to help the West understand we're in this together. We need each other. We've got an agricultural region, we've got an arid region, we've got, where we've got this tremendous opportunity in terms of renewable energy, in terms of water technology and so forth. The West needs us in the same way that we need the West. And I see no value in, the conversation's just not worth having. It would be more of the same. There's always going to be differences between geographic regions. We're part of one Washington, and we need to respect that. We need to understand our differences, but we also really need to focus on what we have in common. And that's how we're going to get through some of the gridlock that we have in Olympia.
Mr. Strickler, thank you. And that's, the way he sort of framed it there, and I'll turn it to you, Mr. Clicker, addressing it as an idea, and obviously that broader idea being disagreement between Eastern and Western Washington.
Well, it doesn't. I agree with him regarding trying to split off the state, and I'll explain why in just a minute. But he set up a good example of what happened. I sit on the Transportation Committee. Unfortunately, the Democrats, primarily, majority of them were in the urban areas, primarily Puget Sound and in the Spokane region. They kept us out of the conversation. They brought up what their plan was within 2 hours before it was brought out to the media. We had no say, no conversation. So yes, that's right, I sit on the Transportation Committee, but they controlled the gavel. And they control everything that's going on, primarily from out of the Puget Sound area and urban Seattle, Tacoma, Snohomish County, and all of Puget Sound, Spokane as well. What we've run into is we do have a lot of legislators from rural Washington, including Southwest and even out closer to the peninsula, and Eastern and Central Washington. Those that would be on the west of the Cascades, even the Republicans wouldn't want us to split off because they would be even more of a minority. It'll actually be easier if we would get more Republicans in there, more balanced control in the state, get a different governor in there that would be able to make right decisions and not ones that cater only to the Puget Sound. That's what we run into, and that's what really needs to change.
All right, Mr. Clicker, thank you very much. On to question 3, and this is getting to a topic that may come up after the new year, ranked choice voting. That may be brought to the 2023 session. It was in 2022. It's also being used in some other states, including Alaska. So, in your words, we'd like you to please describe ranked choice voting and get your position on that. Mr. Clicker, you first.
Well, that's a good question, and I've really tried to contemplate kind of where I stand on that position, because there's some pros and there's some cons to it. The pros, it gives more people a chance. It creates more of a balanced way of doing things. At the same time, there's some people, if you take, for instance, 5 candidates will go into the vote, and a particular person votes for 3 of those candidates, and those 3 candidates weren't the ones that went into that majority, then their vote doesn't even count, whereas where you have the 2 within a primary, and then the first 2 that come out, you have a clear choice between the 2 of them. And so I think it has its place. I think it needs to play out in those other states, because there's a number of states that are doing it now. There's a number of cities that are doing it, and I think it would be better if it just kind of played out. I would like to see it play out to get a better, a firm grip of if that's really the right way to go.
All right, thanks, Mr. Clicker. Mr. Strickler, same question to you. What do you think about ranked choice voting?
Let's let the people decide. If our citizenry want this, then it should be brought to a referendum, which we have in this state. I'm glad that we've got that kind of immediate, sort of democracy from the people. Vote on it. If this is something that you believe would better our system, I think we need to look at the core of why are people asking for this, and it really comes down to gridlock. It comes down to the fact that you've got a spectrum of political ideas that people don't feel are being accurately represented. There's probably lots of ways we need to consider. How do we get these different ideas in our system? Because we're a stronger system when we have a plurality of ideas and backgrounds of the people in elected roles and so forth. I think where I really struggle personally is that, in a sense, this is an attempt to take a model that works in more of a parliamentary democracy system and apply it to our system, right? Where you've got a range of different parties that come together to form a government, right? It's that idea of different ideologies coming together to make a stronger government together, rather than say this side or this side, as we have today. So I don't know how this would play out in our system. I think that it is valuable for us to look at other states and municipalities that are doing this, better understand their model. But I would challenge the people to bring it forward as a referendum if they believe that this is something worth pursuing.
All right, Mr. Strickler, thank you very much. Moving on to question 4, a pretty quick one here, and sort of allows you to formulate your own question. What's the most challenging issue facing the 16th district right now, and how would you propose to resolve it? Mr. Strickler, you're first this time.
Fundamentally, it's housing, because housing affects everything. It affects property taxes, the whole structure of our tax system. It affects our ability of our employers to be competitive in recruiting talent to their organizations. If they can't find housing, how are those people going to come work in those job fields, right? And we know that salaries are such, right? The median incomes of our households are such that housing is quickly slipping away from homeowners, and that affects our population growth, which directly ties then to our schools. The reason we're seeing declining enrollment in Walla Walla, in Prosser, and in other area schools has directly to do with the cost of housing and students not being able to stay in those districts, right? So this is the issue we have to work on, but I see it as an economic problem. We've got to solve it through job growth, right? By fixing the balance of our economy, strengthening our labor force, that's how we're then going to create more housing. Let's look at it this way. When we work in combination with our unions to grow our workforce, when we work with our trade schools and universities to grow our workforce and the skills, those become good paying jobs that we also need. We need those plumbers, those roofers, those electricians, those construction workers to build the houses for those people, right? So lots of ways we need to approach this problem.
Mr. Strickler, thank you very much. Mr. Clicker, same question to you. Once again, it's pretty broad, but what's the biggest issue for you in the 16th?
Regulation. You look at regulation in everything. It doesn't matter if it is in the Growth Management Act. It doesn't matter if it has to do with labor and industries. It has everything to do with regulatory laws on permitting for building. It has everything to do with businesses that are being regulated out of business. And for farmers and ranchers, they're being regulated out of farming. And so what they do is then they move it right on to a bigger corporation, a bigger business to take it over. So many people, so many businesses cannot operate because we in the state of Washington are being regulated considerably more than many other places. You can move over to Idaho, and it's so much easier moving over into Idaho and building a commercial building or a home or whatever it may be. Their labor laws, they're still safe, but they are not being fined by either infractions or violations. That in so many cases, a farmer or a rancher or a business, if they have a violation that is considered by an L&I agent, they're being fined up to $1,000 or more per violation. And so they can go in there and be completely controlled by that agency. So regulation is the biggest issues that we're dealing with on everything that has to do with our economy and our way of life.
Ms. Clicker, thank you very much. Now let's move on to our 5th question. And this question moves to the topic of immigration. Excuse me. And what kind of legislation you would support or introduce on that? And in your answer, if you could, the League asks that you describe your knowledge of E-Verify and any changes that you would recommend to that process. Mr. Clicker, up first here.
My idea has changed on e-verification a little bit more, primarily because we are not taking care of our immigration system. Currently, we have an administration that's allowing immigration just to come in over the border with they don't care. They won't even go down themselves to see where our issue is there. Really, we do. We need a wall. We need some type of a border to confine people from coming in, be able to see who's coming in or not. Make immigration a legal process, not just coming over the border and going into, my second thought is sanctuary cities or sanctuary states. In the Washington state, guess what we have? That needs to change. We need to put the clamps down a little bit more on people. We can do it in a good way, but at the same time, we stop them at the border, work with Mexico, and keep them from coming through Mexico and making it a freeway into our country. We have so many people that are wanting to immigrate into our country, and they do it legally. They do it in a way where they have to go through the paperwork. They have to wait sometimes a couple years to become legal immigrants Whereas you have these people that are coming across, and so many of them are doing it because they're trying to get away from a corrupt government. But we need to make sure these corrupt governments aren't treating their people wrongly, but we need to keep the people from coming in illegally.
Thank you, Mr. Clicker. And Mr. Trickle, I'll ask a question to you, and I know a lot of people bring up the federal government's role, certainly in immigration, but also, as I said, with the league asking about your thoughts on E-Verify, that system.
So my thought on this really is that, you know, it's presumptive, if you will, for us to talk about this when we're talking about our state, we're talking about a legislative district. Fundamentally, immigration is a federal issue. Yes, we've got a border with Canada, a national border here in Washington State. You know, Canada is one of our biggest trading partners here in Washington. So obviously we want to keep those borders, that flow of trade between BC and Washington State open, right? I guess what I would say here is fundamentally it's a federal issue. I think that as a state, we need to be very cautious about how we approach addressing this issue because it may be truly beyond the bounds of our constitutional abilities to do so, right? But I spent 20 years in the tech industry, and that industry is full of people from around the world. And so I truly have worked with folks that have legally immigrated, and I think it's critical that we realize that this is a competitive factor first and foremost. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about laborers or we're talking about PhDs. We're a better nation when we can attract the best talent from around the world. There are good, hardworking people everywhere in the world, wonderful people, who we need to find ways to create avenues for them to come here, to create businesses, to move our nation forward. And so I think we've got to look at how can we accomplish that goal to remain a competitive country.
Mr. Strickler, thank you very much. Now we have one more question before we get to some closing statements. Our sixth and final question asks about specific legislation you think should be enacted regarding cybersecurity in our state, which is a growing issue. Mr. Strickler, that question's yours.
So I think there's a couple of different ways we can approach this. I mean, coming out of a tech background, yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that we should be looking at how do we keep online services more secure. I think we need to take a close look at the amount of data mining that's done by large corporations, the amount of information that is known about each one of us. I guarantee you, everybody knows we're sitting here right today. They know what we ate for lunch, right? And so the question of who owns that data, who controls that data, and what do you as a consumer, what power do you have over your data is a critical question. I also think that there's a critical question to be had here around the security of our elections. Now, we're blessed here in Washington State to have the most secure and progressively minded election system in the country. Our system is very safe, but there's a significant data component to this. Behind the scenes when those mail-in ballots are counted. We want to make sure that system stays safe. So all of these parts of our life, we need to look at and make sure that we've got the right regulation in place, whether it's our businesses, whether it's our government, and whether it's in our personal life.
Mr. Strickler, thank you very much. Same question to you. Any sort of legislation you think could help cybersecurity?
Well, I think we really need to look at the aspect of China and Russia and some of those countries that really are not our friends. And what kind of cybersecurity do we have to watch over them? We have a lot of cybersecurity over our citizens in the United States, but if you look at those countries trying to infiltrate into our country, they're buying farmland and land right around military bases. They're purchasing land next to laboratories, just where we're at right here. We have PNNL, we have Energy Northwest. Where are some of these countries placing people, and they have watching what we're doing? Where's our cybersecurity there? And at the same time, with the immigration system, we have people coming over the border that are part not only of the cartel, but from out of other countries such as China, Cuba, Russia, Venezuela, that we need to monitor. Monitor our people less and monitor those other countries more. And so it is a big issue. I'd like to see some legislation that would concentrate on some of those other countries first and take care of some of that problem and loosen up some of these cybersecurity issues on our innocent people. They're just everyday working people.
All right, Mr. Clicker, thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Strickler, for your thoughtful answers to those questions. We just kind of scratched the surface, I understand. But before we let you go here on the first half of this program, we did leave some time for some closing statements. We do have 1 minute on a topic or a statement of your choosing. Mr. Clicker, we're back to the top of the order with you.
Okay, well, thank you, Matt, again, the League of Women Voters, for allowing me to be able to give a little bit of insight of what I believe and kind of what my ideology is. I think there's one issue that we haven't covered quite yet, and that has to do with crime and public safety, something that is very a part of everybody's lives right now. We're dealing with such a horrible drug situation and mental health, but we're dealing with low standards of prosecution. We can put as many police officers in every city and on every street, and we need to. But at the same time, we need to prosecute, and we need to have penalties for those people that are committing these crimes. We've loosened it so much that people are committing crimes everywhere and being assaulted, murdered, stores are being broken into throughout the whole district, the state of Washington. So I'm emphasizing on that. At the same time, we need to really concentrate on energy. We need all kinds of energy, not just renewable, and that's fine, but that's a huge footprint. We need energy like nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is going to be the ticket, and we have it right here in the 16th Legislative District, in Tri-Cities, out here at Hanford. It is really important that we concentrate and get legislation to make that happen.
All right, Mr. Clicker, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Mr. Strickler, your closing statement, sir.
I want to thank you, Matt and Mark, and the League of Women Voters, and all of you at home for joining us tonight in this important conversation about the future of the 16th Legislative District. Right now is critical because we're determining what the future of our region looks like. And you've got important discussions to have at home. I'm so thankful that so many of you have welcomed me to your front porches, to your living rooms, to have these conversations about the issues that matter to you. It's humbling to have conversations like we've had about healthcare, about childcare, about housing, and about the struggles that you've had with finding appropriate employment, and about how you want more opportunity and how government needs to play a role in creating more opportunity here in the 16th District. The future is bright for us. We have so many things that can happen here in terms of, we're so lucky to be in this region. And I think we all want it to be a place where we can call home and set down roots. I appreciate you watching this program tonight, and I look forward to meeting you on the campaign trail.
Mr. Strickler, thank you very much. Mr. Clicker, once again, thank you so much. And that does wrap up the first half of today's program. Mark Clicker, Jeff Strickler looking for a 2-year term in the position 1 seat in the State House Representative of the 16th District. Gentlemen, thank you both again. Our next race moves to the 16th Position 2 race, another incumbent and challenger for Position 2. Joining me now are Skylar Rude, seeking a 3rd term in the House. Mr. Rude here in the room with me, and Jan Korn joining remotely. Thank you both for your time and your technology. We've explained the format here as is our standard. We will start with some opening statements. Ms. Korn, let's get right into it. Your 90 seconds for your opening statement begin now.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you for accommodating. My background, I've worked in the service industry my entire life. I've been a waitress and a hairstylist, and I built a career in cosmetology and ultimately owned my own salon for 22 years, which I just closed last year. Growing up, my family instilled in me the importance of community and service. When I was asked to consider running for office, I really couldn't imagine. But the truth is, the people who spoke with me are doing the hard work too. The 16th District deserves someone who knows what it's like to work hard and still struggle to meet ends meet and support their family. We deserve a different kind of leadership, one grounded in a spirit of service, compassion, and generosity. I've served on the executive boards of several local nonprofits, and I volunteer with many others. I've been a member of Walla Walla Rotary for 19 years, and 7 of those were on the board of directors, with a year of that being president. There are a lot of differences of opinion, and yet we are able to come together and get things done. That's why I know I can work with everyone in Olympia.
Ms. Korn, thank you very much for that opening statement. And now we'll get to Mr. Rood, the incumbent in this race. You have 90 seconds for an opening statement.
Thanks for having us today. My name is Skylar Rood. I've been representing the 16th Legislative District for the last 4 years. Before that, I worked as a legislative assistant for then Senator Maureen Walsh for the 16th District. As many of you know, redistricting happened this last year, so the makeup of the district looks different. A lot more Benton County was taken in, so I'm looking forward to the opportunity to work with new areas of the district. I serve on the Appropriations Committee, which is the operating budget, the Education Committee, which is K-12, and the Healthcare Committee. My focus over the last 4 years has been in education, and the reason for that is because I feel a high-quality K-12 experience really builds a foundation for a student to exit that system and be a successful, productive person in our society and in a career. I'll continue to work on those issues, but there's a lot more work to be done. I suspect we'll cover a lot of it, but I think an overarching issue that took me to the legislature was a sense of bipartisanship. I think it's important to put, as my campaign motto has said for the last 4 years, people before politics. I think people are kind of sick of that. And I think my 4-year record has demonstrated that I'm willing to work across the aisle with my friends, my Democratic friends over there, and get things done for our district.
Thank you, Mr. Rood. We appreciate it. And like you said, we will get to a lot of things. And as we're finding out with these programs, not nearly enough as well. So let's get to those questions right now, those coming from the League of Women Voters in Benton and Franklin County. And a topic that's headlined a lot of state legislative discussions around the country since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. 17 states have restricted or banned abortion outright, including our neighbors in Idaho. So the question for you, Ms. Korn, we'll get you started with the round of questioning with you. What legislative policies do you or would you support or introduce regarding abortion in Washington state?
Well, I would definitely seek to add it as an amendment to our Constitution, state constitution, because it is under attack. The other day, this question came up, and my opponent spoke about that it was kind of an overreaction, and it wasn't quite as serious as people were making out. And as we've seen what just happened in Idaho, things are coming down very quickly. And if we don't do something to secure women's freedom to make choices about their medical care, then we're going down a really scary path. So I would definitely vote to have it added to the Washington state constitution.
All right, Ms. Korn, thank you very much. And we'll turn the question to Mr. Rood. Same to you, since now the states have the power to decide in this case. What legislative policies would you support in regards to abortion?
Yeah, actually that interview that Jan was referencing, that question didn't come up, and I brought it up at the very end. I was surprised, so we're getting it out of the way up front. Yeah, in the past, I have always deferred to the court case, Roe v. Wade, and it wasn't a state issue at that point. Obviously, that has changed. And as I said yesterday, I don't plan on running any bills on that topic. I think listeners might find it interesting to know that because of bills that passed last session that hadn't taken effect yet, Washington has become more permissive on abortion since the Dobbs decision overturned Roe v. Wade. We know where the governor stands on that issue. We know where the legislature stands. A lot of that law in Washington state was drafted by the voters and was decided on the ballot. So I think that is pretty settled in Washington. I think what House Republicans were focusing on last year was protecting the health of mothers. And one bill that I voted against last year expanded the providers that can provide access to abortion, lower level credentialing, and we felt that was created a safety risk for women. But again, I don't plan on pursuing that as an issue. We have mental health and healthcare issues and law enforcement reform and other issues that are a priority.
Gives you some insight on the news cycle. It's only been a few months since that had happened, so probably a lot to change in the coming years for that as well. All right, moving on to question number 2, and these next couple of questions have to do with elections, and this one about election security, and I'll set this one up with a little bit of context. Mr. Rood, you'll be up first on this one. The Benton County Auditor's Office invited the League of Women Voters to participate in what's called the paid pilot program, along with representatives of the Republican and Democratic parties, to see the ballot counting process during the 2022 election season. Now, if elected, do you plan to introduce or support any specific kind of legislation regarding election security in the state of Washington? And if so, please describe it, Mr. Rood.
Yeah, I think election security has been a conversation around the country over the last couple of years. Washington State has been a leader in mail-in voting, and so for us, the law had already been established and had been implemented for a long time. I may have been concerned if I lived in a different state that had never done that, and all of a sudden we're rushing to implement mail-in voting. But in Washington State, I don't have any concern that there is widespread election fraud happening. I think our past secretaries of state, Sam Reed, Kim Wyman, as elections experts, even before they became secretaries of state, were confident in the system. And I have repeatedly, when confronted by folks who think that there's a lot of fraud happening, asked for evidence, never receive it, encourage them to report any evidence of fraud, because there are occasional cases and those are prosecuted. So I don't plan on introducing any legislation on that topic. There may be areas of improvement, but there's not widespread fraud, in my opinion.
All right, Mr. Rood, thank you very much. Ms. Corn, I'll turn that question to you as well, just about introducing legislation, or really what you would do in terms of election security if elected here.
Well, as has been stated, Washington State has had mail-in voting for over 20 years, and there's never been an issue at all. And so I don't see any reason to make any changes or any efforts to secure it further.
All right, Ms. Corn, still lots of time left if you had anything to add to that, otherwise we can move on.
You can move on, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Well, let's move on to question 3. How about away from security, and let's talk about process a little bit. Ranked choice voting is that process that we're talking about here. As we know, might be brought to the 2023 session as it was last year. Now, it's being used in some other states, including Alaska. Ms. Corn, we'll start with you. Please describe and state your position on ranked choice voting.
Well, I do think we could look into it a little bit more, but I find it really intriguing. I feel like if you had, it would take a lot of the really aggressive competitiveness out of campaigns, and if you had, I think we would attract better candidates, a wider variety of candidates, and there might be 1 or 2 people that you would want to support. And so I think so far the places where it's been implemented is working well. I just think we need to know a bit more about it, but I'm definitely open to it.
And Mr.
I think it would take a lot of the money out of campaigns and things too.
Right,
level the playing field a bit more.
Thank you very much, Ms. Corn. I'll turn that same question over to you, Mr. Rood, just about ranked choice voting. Where do you stand on that idea? I know when I ask that question, a lot of people go, I'm going to kind of wait to see what the other states do. I wonder where you stand.
I'm generally open to the idea, or I guess I should say I'm generally supportive of the idea. I think it is more fair. The top 2 system that we're currently using can make one candidate stand out and win into the general simply because they're different than the other large amount of candidates. So I don't think it's necessarily fair. Ranked choice, I think, would be more fair. There was a bill last session I was asked to co-sponsor, and it would have made the presidential primary ranked choice. And I think there's a lot of value in slowly and methodically changing our system if that's what we decide to do. Changing the presidential primary immediately wasn't an approach that I could support. I attempted to compromise and come up with some amendments to that bill that would have allowed a local option and elections officials to kind of have the stamp of approval if they wanted to implement it in their jurisdiction, and that wasn't successful. So I'm still open to it, but it would have to be something more incremental, local option, and I mean maybe even require voter approval to implement ranked choice. I mean something like that.
All right, Mr. Rood, thank you very much. Well, let's move on to question number 4 now. And I know we're sort of asking a lot of questions about hypothetical legislation that you would introduce. So let's talk about this one. Would you introduce or support legislative policies that help marginalized groups, LGBTQ community, people of color, or women and children perhaps living in poverty, and why or why not? But if so, what would legislation like that look like? Mr. Rood, we're back to you at the top.
I think there is a lot of opportunity in that area. I'm a member of the LGBTQ Commission, the House Republican legislative advisor to it. I had an amendment on that bill that gave each caucus an advisory member to the commission to help it be successful. I think I mentioned recently the Fair Start for Kids Act. I think making childcare more affordable for low-income families, I think, is something we can do. Part of the reason that I focus so much in K-12 is because I feel like that's almost the great equalizer and can provide a hand up to people that are disadvantaged. And so facilitating that environment where we combat bullying and provide a safe place for learning, I think is the best that we can do. And so I've been working in those areas.
All right, Mr. Rood, thank you very much. Ms. Corn, I'll turn that question to you as well. Legislation that might protect some of the marginalized groups in your community.
Well, absolutely. That's a lot of the reason why I decided to run, is that when COVID came about, we really found the inequities in our communities. It really brought to light just how bad things are for some people. And coming out of COVID, it's just made it so much worse. So I think it presented an opportunity for us to be able to see what the issues are and do something about it. I believe firmly that everyone deserves the opportunity to have the dignity of working and thriving and being paid well for the work they do. And certainly our marginalized communities, the members they've been treated unfairly for so long. And that's a lot of the reason why, seeing all of that is one of the big reasons why I decided to run. We do a lot from the nonprofit sector, but I feel that there's a lot that could be added to it.
Ms. Corn, thank you very much. Now for question number 5, let's talk money. More specifically, what you'd want money for here in the 16th. I'm sure your constituents are listening. As budget proposals come in from all corners, what do you think should be included in the state budget to address the needs of your district? Ms. Corn, you're first here.
Well, we need to definitely put money into infrastructures, fix our roads and provide more public transportation, make it easier for people to live and get back and forth to work. Definitely mitigating climate change, manufacturing, technology, electric grids. There's a lot going on over in the Tri-Cities with Hanford and ability to grow there. So definitely bring attention. I've just started meeting with people when I decided to run in May. And so I've been meeting with different groups of people and finding out what is needed. And that's basically the way I will operate, is I can't possibly know anything about what is going on in the political scene at this point, but just been meeting with people already to try to get up to speed and figure out who the players are and where the needs are.
All right, let's turn that question to you, Mr. Rood, as somebody who may have access to some of those budget makers out there. What would you ask for here in the 16th?
Can I get about 10 minutes on this one?
You have 90 seconds. Good luck.
Okay, well, I was writing a list. I think there's so much of what the legislature does costs money. And I see that on the Appropriations Committee during budget development. And one that is specific to this area is mental health. I think a mental health treatment facility and the personnel required for that, the capital cost of that, it's needed. I've been hearing that, and that's something that I could advocate for in the capital budget. But a couple of things that stick out is a Plan 1 cost of living adjustment. I hear that from retirees who are aging, and with inflation at the rate that it is, Plan 1 hasn't had a cost of living adjustment to keep up with inflation ever. And so that's something that I'm hearing. Special ed funding in the K-12 system is a pretty important need. There's currently a 13.5% cap. The state will provide additional dollars for each special ed student until the population in that school district hits 13.5, and then that additional funding stops, whether the rate is 18 or 20 or 25% special ed. And so that's something the legislature needs to address. And that kind of comes back to certain communities that are maybe disadvantaged and need a little bit of extra attention from the state. So I could go on, but my time's up.
Well, we will have more questions, so maybe we'll get a chance to address them there. And I think I'll probably include a couple more because I think we have a bit more time with you here. Let's go to question number 6. And this one is a good one because we want to find out what's going to get our legislators to reach across the aisle. Much of what we discuss seems to elicit, hyper-partisan talking points at times. But in your eyes, what are these bipartisan issues in the state? What do you think the legislature can agree upon and work on together in the state of Washington? Mr. Rood, question starts with you.
I would say K-12 seems to be fairly bipartisan. Healthcare, not so much. Another issue that I was thinking about as far as funding is services for individuals with developmental disabilities. And there's a wait list waiting for services. I would think that an issue like that would be bipartisan. The cost of living adjustment that I was mentioning, I worked hard on with a Democratic colleague, and that was a very bipartisan effort. Folks might find it interesting to know that over 90% of the bills coming through the legislature are broadly bipartisan, almost unanimous. So there is a lot. Then you'll touch on a topic like gun control or abortion, and then it starts to feel more partisan. But I've done my best over the last 4 years to reach across the aisle whenever possible. I started a bipartisan work group with a Democratic colleague, and then we expanded our host committee to 4, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And the whole intent of that is to provide an environment where we can just have conversations, get to know each other, and find out what those issues are, where we can work together. So, like I said, 90% of bills are broadly bipartisan. And looking back at the bills that I've been able to sponsor and pass, all of them except for one have been unanimous out of the House. So they're related to safety in schools.
All right, thank you, Mr. Rood. Ms. Corn, same to you. As somebody who's not the incumbent, I would probably maybe just rephrase it a little bit. What are the things you look forward to getting done that are bipartisan issues in your mind?
Well, I just think bringing back civility and being able to work together. I have heard over the past 8 years or so that it's getting harder and harder for people to work together. And so I feel as though we just need to be able to put the needs of our citizens and communities above wherever we are. And I think it does come from not just in the state house, but a national level where the tenor and dialogue seems to be just so divisive. And I just think that there's a lot. I think that I would agree that most things we all want the same things. It's just being able to, when I've been going door to door and talking with voters and stuff, it's really, you can usually find a way to meet the middle. And I just don't see any reason why we aren't better at doing that in our government. So it's a priority.
Corn, thank you very much. And you know what, because we have more time, I'll tell our producers back there, let's re-rack the clock to 1:30, and we got a couple more we can ask of our candidates here. Ms. Corn, I'll turn this one to you. What specific legislation do you think should be enacted regarding cybersecurity here in the state?
Well, I am not a technology person, that's for sure, but we definitely need to secure all of our means of communication. It's, yeah, I wouldn't know how to go about that, but we definitely need to take strides to secure our cybersecurity, internet interactions and things.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Root, I'll ask you that same question since it affects so much. Any legislation that we could use in Washington State regarding cybersecurity?
I'm going to have an answer similar to Jan's. I would defer to Representative Matt Benke, who teaches cybersecurity at CPC. He's the person I look to on those issues, just so outside of my wheelhouse. Nothing comes to mind as a priority. I think data privacy is an area where we need concern, or we need to do more to protect data privacy, but that's not really a cybersecurity issue.
Right. All right. Thank you very much. I'll tell you what, I don't know if I'd have a good answer either, so I'm okay with that. Let's move on to our last question here before we get to some closing statements. I want to ask what legislation you'd support or introduce when it comes to immigration. A lot of people talk about this on a federal level, but what does it mean to us here in the 16th, and how would that apply to what you would want to do in Olympia, Mr. Root?
Like you pointed out, it's a federal issue. There really isn't anything that the legislature can do regarding immigration policy, but I think there are other issues that arise that kind of tie into immigration. One that comes to mind was a bill that provided, so if a person is a U.S. citizen, they qualify for certain tuition benefits in college. Students who are undocumented don't qualify for the same tuition benefits. So there was a bill, the legislature was stepping in to provide some very low interest loans to undocumented students. And that was something that I supported. I think that it's not the fault of the child who's brought here. Wasn't their choice to be brought to the United States. And I want every child, and our Constitution, our state constitution backs this up too. Every child, regardless of their immigration status, I think should have the opportunity to participate and be successful in our economy, in our schools, and that seemed like a bill that did that. Many people might remember the McCleary decision, the school funding decision, and so the words of the Constitution are more memorable now, saying every child within the state's borders has a right to our K-12 system.
Mr. Root, thank you very much. Ms. Corn, I'll ask you that same question. What are your thoughts in regards to immigration?
Well, it is true that it is a federal issue, but I just can't imagine that we cannot figure out how to allow people to come back and forth and work within our borders and keep everything secure. I think it's a decision that is made. It shouldn't take 20 years or 10 years for people who are seeking asylum or just people that want to work back and forth across the border. I was friends with the people who owned a business here, Cameo Heights, for many years, and he did a talk at our Rotary Club one time that, because they had an orchard as well, that we will import our food or we'll import our labor. And I think we all understand that there are certain jobs that are very well filled by people who are maybe move around where the work is. And so I think we definitely need to value the people who do come into this country to work hard, and they should be taken care of.
All right, Ms. Corn, thank you very much. And we thank both of you for your thoughtful responses on these issues. Before we sign off here, we did say we'd leave time for closing statements. So let's get to those. Let's set the clock at 1 minute for a time limit for those. Ms. Corn, you go first.
Well, it's very clear that I am not a politician. What I am is someone who cares about the future of our communities. I will model leadership that is grounded in service, compassion, and generosity. An important thing I learned while operating a small business was how to listen to my staff and customers. I have firsthand experience with vendor relations and government regulations. I know how to network and collaborate and work with people who have the information that we need. I know a politician, a legislator cannot possibly know everything, and I'm behind the curve on that, definitely just getting involved. But I know that I can learn and collaborate and network with people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Korn. And Mr. Rood, we turn to you for your closing statement, sir.
Since I have a minute, I'll just get just a little bit back into the bipartisanship that I wish I touched on. Part of the reason that partisanship is so intense is because our systems are built around a two-party system. Like literally our state capitol building has a room for Republicans and a room for Democrats. So you go into separate rooms for your bill briefings. I mean, that's completely contrary to collaboration. So that's why it's so important that we reach across the aisle. And it takes a lot of work to do that. And so I pledge to continue to put in that work to make sure that we can do within our two-party system, do my best to try to cross the aisle. And really that's for the benefit of this district. I think my record, I've voted on probably 1,500 or 2,000 bills over the last 2 years or 4 years. So there's a voting record to go on. I hope that I feel like I've done well for the district so far, and ask for the opportunity to continue serving the 16th district.
Mr. Rood, thank you very much. Thank you both. Skylar Rood, Jan Korn, candidates here in the 2022 election for the 2-year term in the position 2 seat in the state's 16th district. And a reminder, the 2022 general election is on Tuesday, November 8th. The 18-day voting period for mail-in ballots starts Friday, October 21st. If you still need to register, you can do it online up until October 31st, but you can register in person all the way up to Election Day. Now, NWPB's Vote 2022 coverage continues through Thursday this week, including a number of Benton and Franklin County races. Be sure to tune in tomorrow. Our next program looks at a few different positions that affect Franklin County voters, including a race on the Pasco School Board, a pair of challengers for the Benton-Franklin District Court Judge, and the race for Franklin County Sheriff. For our live viewers, that begins at 7 p.m. Wednesday, but you can also find us online. If you missed our coverage of the races in the 8th Legislative District or anything from tonight's program, you can find it at nwpb.org/vote2022. Thanks for being here.